going forward. General Cavoli, how long have you been watching Russia closely?
Chairman, I began my Russia specialty in 1995 when I spent a year at the Defense Language Institute learning to speak and read and write the language, and I've paid attention to it and worked in jobs associated with it ever since.
You're
So
you're not only conversational, but fluent in Russian, is that correct?
I have always maintained that rating.
Yes, well, give us your assessment now, first of all, of what we have learned, what our military has learned during this 2.5 years of conflict in Ukraine. What have we learned about Russia's military, where are they now, and Ukraine's military capability and where they are now?
Chairman, we've learned an awful lot. First of all, I should point out that early on in the conflict, all of the services and the Joint Force established a variety of cells and organizations deliberately to study the lessons of the conflict. And we've had everything from publications about it to seminars on it at a classified and unclassified level. And we have learned an awful lot. Some of the things that we have gained as a military are well, they're technical, they're procedural, and they're sort of large-scale operations focused. So technically, for example, we have learned an awful lot about Russian measures and countermeasures and how to counter countermeasures, a lot of technical stuff. We've seen a lot of growth in both the Russian capability and the Ukrainian capability in electromagnetic warfare, electronic warfare, and we have learned from that, and we have modified many of our procedures. I think you're familiar with the U.S. Army's Transformation and Contact Initiative. That is really based on lessons learned from Ukraine. As a short example, our use of drones has changed deeply across the Joint Force. Before this conflict in the U.S. Army, for example, we had very few but large drones associated with large units. Now we're proliferating smaller drones to smaller units and having a larger number of drones in lower and lower hands. Fundamental change in the way we're doing business. There are many, many other technical and tactical lessons we've learned. At a meta level, sir, I would say some of the big lessons we've learned are about scale. The scale of this conflict is just awe-inspiring. Thousands of tanks destroyed on both sides. The Russians have lost more than 4,000 tanks, which is the inventory almost of the United States tank corps. So the need for replacement, for depth of magazine, for resilience, all these are lessons that we're learning, and I believe the services are programming it as the years go forward. So we've learned a lot.
Before you continue, in February of 22, we would not have dreamed of such a loss from Russia of tanks, would we?
We would not have. I did not anticipate the war to go this long, and I did not anticipate Ukraine to be able to destroy so much of Russia's warfighting capability.
I hope I didn't break your train of thought, so continue.
No, so as we watch the Russians, we see that their level of skill in some technical areas is very high and is evolving during the course of the war, but it's mainly isolated in specific pockets. It does not appear to be generalizable across the force, and overall, the quality of their force, especially their ground force, has been decreasing throughout the conflict. On the Ukrainian side, we see sort of the opposite. We see a military that started pretty much from an almost cold start. We had been helping them before the war, but not at the scale we began to after the war, and they've evolved and developed very, very quickly. So we've learned a lot about institutional adaptation from watching both sides as well.
If we or our NATO allies had to face Russia ourselves in a conflict, because of what we learned, would we be exponentially better off today because of the lessons we've learned in the last 2.5 years?
Oh yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Say a word or two in half a minute about the Russian economy.
So the Russian economy has been both bolstered and distorted by this war. Specifically, the Russian government has had to turbocharge their defense sector. And in so doing, they have created a very strong inflationary pressures throughout the economy, but especially in the civil sector. They've responded to that with high interest rates to hold inflation down. The central banker, Elvira Nabiullina, has the overnight rate, the prime rate is over 21% right now. That is choking off the viability of the civil economy. So one has a huge oversized defense sector, but an anemic civil sector. And that defense sector, as you know, Chairman, is not a productive not a productive economy for the nation. It's productive for the fighting of the war, but beyond that, it has pretty much swamped things out. It appears that it will be very difficult to unwind such an imbalance, and we'll need to consider that as we go forward.
Thank you, sir. We'll continue this conversation. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. General Langley, the presence of the United States on the African continent is not significantly military. In fact, we don't have any troops there at all, but we do have, until recently, a State Department and a USAID presence. Can you indicate to us how valuable that presence has been to you?
Senator, as you know, heretofore, we had a whole of government approach in some of the challenges on the African continent, and we used that in past years. Now, given that USAID and a number of capabilities are being folded under the State Department, we continue to look at ways to be able to leverage that in U.S. government pressure on especially our competitors in achieving our strategic goals.
Thank you. General Cavoli, could you give the committee a brief assessment of the battlefield? We hear a lot about Ukraine's challenges, but as I understand it, they are still holding significant territory. They are taking the fight to the Russians and innovating on the battlefield daily.
Sure, Senator Reid. All of the above is true. So if we take just a moment and go down the front line of troops, if you don't mind. So if we start in the northern part of the battlefield, the active battlefield area, that's the place where Ukraine last summer pushed an advance into Russia in an area called Kursk. And they took a large part of Kursk. This is where the Russians introduced North Korean troops to help push the Ukrainians back out. They set an original goal of the end of September to have the Ukrainians out of Kursk. The Ukrainians today are still in Kursk. There is a sizable force holding a sizable, diminished, but sizable chunk of ground inside Russia in Kursk Oblast right now, and they're holding on very good defensive terrain. South of there, in Belgorod, the Ukrainians a couple of weeks ago pushed a smaller counteroffensive back into Russia. So we still have a back and forth going up in that area. If we come down inside of Ukraine to some of the big battlefields up in Luhansk, and first of all, there's the city just west of the old Bakhmut called Chasiv Yar. The Ukrainians and the Russians have been fighting over this city and the city to the south of it, Toretsk, for about 8 months now. In recent weeks, the Russian offensives have sort of petered out. They had been decreasing in scale, moving from company size to platoon size, now basically small groups of infantrymen trying to rush forward under artillery fire, and they have failed to gain ground in the last couple of weeks. In fact, the Ukrainians have taken a little bit of ground back from them. If we come farther south from that, we get to Pokrovsk in Donetsk province, where the Russians continue to try to take Pokrovsk. They are stalled out on their axes trying to encircle it. They got pretty close, but the Ukrainians have held the Russians back. That's on the ground. The Russians seem to be suffering from a paucity of armored vehicles and a lack of manpower. The Ukrainians on their side have assumed very strong defensive positions, well dug in, and appear to have solved some of their manpower problems that were so acute last autumn. They've increased the pool of people available for mobilization. They've increased the pool of people available for voluntary recruitment, and they've done a good job squeezing people out of headquarters to the front. If we look in other domains, both sides are relying on long-range attack. The Russians largely with cruise missiles and glide bombs, and the Ukrainians are relying mainly on one-way attack drones, as well as some indigenously produced cruise missile systems, one in particular that I've got in mind that we could talk about in closed session, sir. I hope that helped.
It does, sir. If the administration withholds war material, spare parts, and particularly intelligence advice, what would be the effect on the Ukrainian forces?
First of all, it would obviously have a rapid and deleterious effect on their ability to fight, Senator. The Ukrainians depend on us principally, uniquely, I should say, for their high-end anti-aircraft systems. So the things that shoot down the ballistic missiles and the long-range attack missiles that the Russians throw at them almost daily, that is mainly supplied by the United States.
General Langley and General Cavoli, thank you both for your many years of service to this country. General Cavoli, you serve as both the commander of the U.S. European Command and also as the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. That means you are responsible for the overall command of NATO military operations and forces, including the United States nuclear forces that are deployed to those NATO countries. NATO is a nuclear alliance. Our deterrence strategy has worked for over 75 years. Having an American serve as Supreme Allied Commander of Europe has been a key part of that strategy. General, can you at this level of classification walk us through how command and control of U.S. nuclear forces in Europe works today, including your role?
Absolutely, Senator. So to keep it at a very open level, the United States guarantees, has always offered a certain amount of nuclear force to NATO to be employed by SACEUR. So we have some nuclear weapons that in a conflict, upon the agreement of the United States and the rest of the nations, would be turned over to SACEUR to be delivered by a variety of nations who are involved in this program, all of them NATO nations. That all happens under the command and control of SACEUR. If SACEUR were not an American officer, we would have to find some other way to do that, and it would certainly not be as integrated with the rest of SACEUR's operations as it is now. So, yeah, I basically, as the American commander, have those weapons in my possession, and at the time of need, as instructed, I would pass them to myself as the Supreme Allied Commander to employ in accordance with the 32 nations.